the the whole idea of like, oh, this validation situation, right? How do we, what are the issues that we see in the validation, right? And this person, I think Adrian, he caught it. He basically said, hey, you know, I could literally pass anything in there, and that just brings us back to this conversation, right? Like, if you validate one by one, you're gonna have a lot of tests, like
Yeah.
one-time tests for each. So we don't want to do that, definitely, because it's gonna cause a lot of problems. But it's gonna just take even longer. Like, I feel like it's part of the engineering experience. If we really care about, we claim we care about the engineering experience. I feel like part of that is to care a lot about the engineer's time, right?
Yeah.
Without sacrificing things like I was just talking about toasters and automation and all that. And this, I've seen this happen before my eyes more than I can imagine. Like, people will automate something, and then a group of people will inherit that tool, right? But they
Mm.
don't know what it does, and they don't have time to know what it does because the tool has been already factored into the estimates of every effort, right? So
Mm.
when we used to say like 3 hours or 4 hours for a foundation service on the modify or something, you start factoring that out. So people don't even have time, to kind of think about, even understanding um, um, how it works, right? And then the tool breaks, and then nobody knows how to fix it,
Yeah.
right? The tool breaks. I've seen this happen. This is just the life cycle of automation and tools, right? The tool breaks. No one knows how to fix it. No one is maintaining it because usually, more often than ever, it's not open source and nobody really cares about it, right? And then when it breaks, people start saying, "Why are we using it? Let's just go back to native. Let's just go back to the defaults," right? And then people start building some practices on top of that, right? And then someone says, "Hey, why don't we write a tool to do this for us?" And then it just keeps going on and on and on and on like that.
Mhm.
I think it's a question of maintainability. Um,
Yeah.
I like Brian Parker says this. He says we like to create quiet tools. You create it once and never look at it again. It just keeps working and working and working and working, and it just doesn't break. So anyway, so let's go back to this. Like, in this session, just like a lot of people were telling me this. They said, "Okay, Hassan, you're just gonna go over the same thing you've been saying." I was like, "Well, I'm gonna surprise you. I'm gonna surprise you because every single time you go over the same, it's like reading a book multiple times, right?
Mhm.
You're gonna go over the same chapter. You're gonna see things that you haven't seen the first time because your brain automatically tries to ignore things that it already knows and looks for something more exciting. At least that's how my brain works. Okay, what are we doing today? We're doing date validations. Is that what we're gonna do? And we need to kind of explain to people why we. I can't tell you, one of the most common questions, Christo, that I received from people was, why don't you just let the server generate the dates? Why don't you just let the server put the date time on it, and all that pain will just go away? Because that's pretty much what 99.9% of developers out there, they could be right. They could be, that the server just puts the timestamp in there, and you don't have to worry about that. The problem with this is that you'll never know the client time. You'll never know when the
Mm.
client actually initiated the request. It has a very nice security feature where if someone tries to play man in the middle and intercept your request before it goes to the server, you're already out of date. You're already time restricting them. So if they intercept in the middle and try to do something with the request, you're gonna miss the shot, and then the server will reject that request. Nobody thought of it this way, but I'm just kind of going through scenarios where this is kind of feasible and useful.
Yeah.
But more importantly, I don't think servers should be generating data for a request that you're trying to store in the system. Like, it should just pick up your request, validates a property, and then decides whether to store it or not. At least for simplistic APIs, right? I mean, there will always be APIs where you go and say, here's number one, number two, and give me the result. Give me the outcome of that. So the server obviously is doing something for you, right? But anyway, what do you have in your mind? You wanted to talk about validations. Did you want to close the task and talk about validations and options? Did you want to talk? Let's talk about validations and options. I actually care a lot more about innovative ideas than
Okay.
getting work done. Actually.
Yeah. So um, after our last session that was so late for me, I couldn't really sleep. So I started playing with the idea of validations and uh, uh, how we could do that. Because as you just said, we need to be careful what the impact is on developers for all the tests we're adding for the holes we identify.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I built a proof of concept, and the idea that I play with was to externalize the validation engine. Um, and the reason why I wanted to do that is that if we can externalize the validation engine, you can thoroughly test that um, with the 4 to 5 tests needed to check that you're not tampering with uh, the rules added to the data dictionary or when the exception is thrown, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then the the other thing
Mm-hmm.
that I played with is looking at the most common validation rules that we've got and also
Mm-hmm.
put them in the external library.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And sort of the direction that my head was going in is that if we make that functionality, framework functionality, similar to what we would have with system.math,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know that it's trusted, it is standard compliant code, it's open source, it's fully tested. And then we don't have to repeat all those tests or even repeat that logic inside our service. We can just surface a validation engine via a broker and mock our expectations. So that cut out a lot of tests. And but yeah, it does add some extra things. So I try to cater for all 4 holes that we identified. So I did a lot of things. Um,
So some ideas, I'm just trying to visualize this to people. Like you're basically want to create a validation engine library, right?
Yeah.
And
So
then put,
whether that sits in a library by itself or whether it becomes Svelte, my idea is to get it into Svelte, so it becomes framework. That is
yes, yes,
standard trusted code that um, it's not just a library that somebody maintains and it's not known. It will come core logic to the standard. Is sort of what
absolutely.
I'm thinking.
So just to clarify, I want this to be clear. You have to know, by the way, some people get really, someone put that on Reddit. Someone said Hassan's videos are too long and boring, and they just don't understand. Like the mass majority of people that watch these videos are people who don't have that context that you and I are talking about. It seems like it makes sense to you and me. I know every single word you just said, every
Mm.
single letter you just uttered. I know exactly what you're saying, right? But that's not everyone. And I want to make sure that people understand what we're talking about. So that we do validation in a certain way, and you want to externalize validations behind a library that's a standard compliant maintained by the standard community.
Yeah.
And then instead of actually verifying that the validation happened, you're verifying that you passed the right rules to this broker. And the rest is history. Is that what you're saying? Is that right?
Yeah. So what happens client side is you set up an expectation of the rules. You still materialize the rules on your domain model. So
Mm-hmm.
you could have local rules still that's specific to your service, and they will still execute fine. But in terms of when you hit the broker, you then trust like you would any other trust like system.math that it does round, it does give you the absolute value. So you don't have to test that logic again because that is already tested. So you only set up your expectation on your broker that I've passed that rules, and then you verify on when the concrete implementation is called to execute it that expectation was met.
I see. And I'm assuming like by externalizing the validation engine, you're basically um, you can basically fix or remediate some of the holes that we found throughout the way, in the validation. Like for instance, like I mentioned before, you have a validation problem with, some items are valid and some are not. And we still
Yeah.
have to solve that problem at the library level, right? Because we still need to make sure that the library takes every rule and validates it individually, but it's not a problem of the domain system anymore. Like the domain
No.
system doesn't have to worry about that anymore.
Yeah. So I catered for that as well in the external library. So um, I've catered for the scenario where you could wrap logic around the um, throw if it contains data.
Hmm.
I've added, catered for um, when you add logic to the for loop in the validation, so that some items might be excluded from being added to the data dictionary.
Hmm. Hmm.
I added extra things. So currently we don't check if a message is populated. We just take the message, and if it's there, it's there. So I've added exception check for is the message on the rule valid,
Hmm.
and I also do a type check if the parameter is valid, that you don't pass an empty parameter value. So that's also things that we don't check. So there's a few things on that, and then the other thing that we spoke in the call is that it should throw an exception for a single item or any
Hmm.
number in between up to however many items is in that rule set. And
Right.
yeah,
So
mm,
so let me
so
ask you this. Let's take a look. Like there's some requirements for this rules engine to work. It can't leak its own models. That's number one. We had this conversation, right? Like
yeah,
it can't impose its own models because you're going to use this validation engine. It's not just going to be the foundation service. It's going to be the processing service. It's going to be the orchestration, management, Uber management services. But just be aware, this means that now every service has even more brokers. Like we used to add datetime broker and logging broker. Now we're adding datetime broker, logging broker, and validation broker in the future. Like the number of dependencies here is increasing at the
yeah,
service layer. So you're kind of there's a trade-off kind of thing that we're doing here, just so you're aware of what's
mm,
happening, right? And this trade-off, like there has to be a limit, even though if we're saying, okay, brokers are fine, whatever, there has to be a limit at some point in time where we go and say, okay, that's probably too many brokers and too many
mm,
injections that are happening
yeah.
at the service level, right?
So yeah, so that's the other question is how would we, because I don't think we've actually defined how we're going to treat framework logic. If something is considered framework, does it have to enter your system at a broker through a broker? Because if you use system.math in your services, you don't have to surface system.maths around or absolute or all those functions via a broker, and you don't actually test it. So if it
But
does become framework logic,
right.
um, would it be acceptable that you do a call to that function directly from your services because it is considered framework logic? And then you don't have the increase on dependency, although you still have to mock it to set up your expectations for your rule checks.
I'm not even sure if I would kind of use system.math directly, but I have done this in the past when I said GUID.new GUID. So
Yeah,
I'm using it right at the heart of the domain system because it's a framework, right? It's part of the .NET framework, which is actually we're trying to get away from.
yeah,
We're trying to build like a standardized framework abstraction library where it just kind of you can replace the .NET framework. Ultimately, everything you're working with should be free and not relying on an ecosystem or a cloud or anything like that. Ultimately, someone far, far away, or even nearby who can't afford to pay for software services should be able to build an end-to-end platform without needing that. But okay, so these are the two requirements. We need to kind of figure out, these are my concerns at least, right? Number
mm,
one, it can't, if we consider it as part of the framework, right? Does this take it away from, I mean, if you're in the .NET framework right now, how many validation libraries or validation routines do you actually get today? I mean, you get some. Is null or empty is a validation method, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we figured out that part, right? But you're still gonna have to, if you solve it from that perspective and you say this is a framework, then the framework itself has to happen. Like we need to have the standard framework, right? And it's something that we pull in every project so that we
Mm.
can use everywhere. We don't have that yet. We don't have that
No,
standard framework yet, right?
no. So that's why I started with just externalizing it, so till we've got that, because I think when we previously spoke about that as well, we said exception is also a good candidate for framework.
Right. Yeah,
Um,
exceptions for sure. This is an easy one. This is a no
yeah.
thought. Like we all need exceptions and we need better exceptions. Okay, that's fine. So okay, if we externalize it, can we pass rules to it as dynamic objects that have no,
Yes.
okay, so that's that. It sounds like you have a demo. But also, let's try it. If you have a POC and a demo, let's take a look at it.
Okay. Quickly.
I think we might be headed in the right direction. I just want to see like what could be wrong with it. I wouldn't know until I see it, and then something hits me. I need
Yeah.
to say something, so
Okay. So let me just quickly say I created
mhm,
two
mhm,
libraries. So I'll quickly go over the externalization of that. So um, I think that the main one is the rules engine. Um, there's not much difference in there, apart from I now check if the parameter is valid. We
mhm,
don't do that currently.
mhm,
I check if the rule is populated, which is another thing that we don't currently do. And then um, I check if the rule has got a message.
mhm,
Um, and then in terms of internal to this, I had to work around dynamic, because the compile time states is not always, so I had to do this get save dynamic property
mhm,
to get that out. But other than that, the rule is still the same. We've still got the loop. Um, we've got that. So I've just put my checks in there for what we've tested. And that's it in terms of that.
mhm, mhm,
And then for the sake of demonstration, I've moved all the rules out um, to a rule file. So all the
mhm,
invalids is in the same thing. I've added a message here, specifically so that people can see what this value is, because they'll need to test for that. So it'd be nice to have that tooltip. So I added that.
mhm,
And then in terms of testing, I've got um, all the failing tests that should fail. Not fail for all the valids, should fail if there's not all the items is added. And then for the rules, I've independently tested each rule as well. So I've got a passing test and a failing test for both cases of the rule. So
right.
and then on string, I've extended that as well to cater for every single permutation of white space. So we currently just do 3 in our test. So I've just added that. Um, and then uh, in terms of what we've got in our project then is I've got a validation broker that simply calls that. We can see the signature is still the same. So it
Mhm,
passes a
mhm,
parameter of that. So that's not changed. And then in our service, when it comes to validation, we've obviously injected the
the validation
validation
broker. Mhm,
broker there. And then when we use it in the service, it will be a call to this validation broker. You pass in, I use generics to pass in the exception type.
mhm,
Um, I just thought it's nicer because then I can restrict type
Mm-hmm.
rather than having to do a separate test in implementation. We pass the message of the exception that we want to generate based on that type,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and then it's all our rules. Um,
Would it be better if you validated the exception as a reference instead of letting it construct your exception?
we could do that as well.
Let me tell you why. Because you still want your service to control that exception, even post the validation flow, right? Just an idea. This is just an idea. So you're basically passing the reference of the exception. And you're saying, hey, do whatever, and then give it back to me because I want to do other things with that exception, right? But I also see why you had to do it this way because you're not really returning an exception. Like with this validation execution, this is the terminal point. If something
Yeah,
goes wrong, you're gonna break the
throw it. Yeah,
circuit, right?
yeah.
Now,
Um,
hmm,
and this is just a demo. So here I'm calling the external rules.
hmm
The validate URL that we did last week, I kept as internal rule because I thought that's very specific to the service. Um, so that is still the same. Um, and for that, it still works. So I can just to show on the validations. So I commented out these. If I commented that back in again,
hmm
um, and I run my tests,
it'll know
it will know. Yeah.
because now it's dealing with specific objects that expect, yeah.
So I can see that um, up to 500 it was fine, and then on 501 it said
You shouldn't, yeah,
no exception was thrown. Um, the same thing for if I try to fiddle inside this loop. Um, so that's the other test that says for that it failed.
because it
Um,
had a, yeah. So it's basically
yeah. So it does all that checks for us.
because
Um,
now you have the power to go and say, I want to know the exact number of validation rules that were passed,
yeah,
but also the number of, hold on, let me see if I can break this. So you're you're basically saying if invalid data exception dot data that count is less than 500.
yeah.
So what does your test do? Does it permutate based on the number?
Um, so I've done 1,000 tests.
Hmm
Hopefully you would not have more than 1,000 rules on a model, but
Uh-huh.
um, as this is not directly linked to your, we can make it. The test is so fast, so we can even increase that number to check for more cases. But it checks literally that for each condition on the for loop that if I've added items,
hmm
that the items is there on the exit, and then it checks that the keys is there. So it makes sure that your data collection doesn't have less stuff than the rules that you've passed in for the failing items.
hmm hmm
And then it does check that for every single item you expect a fail result at the end of that test, whether it's one data item, two data items, up to 1,000. You expect that still fails. So if you've wrapped any logic around that, it still does that. Um,
Gotcha.
and oh yeah, I did another extension. Um, so on my rules, and this is to cater for the FOFO. I've extended my rule to have an object called values.
Hmm.
This is something I've played with in the past as well, is that when you debug, you sometimes don't have sight of the values when it is inside the validation
Oh,
engine.
the actual value that happened.
Um,
Nice.
so, so, so the idea was extend it to values. Then, if you do have to debug something in the validation engine, then you've got all that detail. And if I go down to something like uh, where's the
Can you actually add that in the I guess you could add an array, right? You could basically, I mean, in the exception data itself, you can add an array, right?
yeah.
So
So
against the key, you could add an array of things. But how will you
I
display?
I I I,
Mhm.
I didn't want to do that because that array is your failure messages, and it's not important to the client or the consumer doesn't need to worry what the values was.
They do,
For, for
trust
me
me.
as for me as a system, the system needs to compare that the values that you set up in the test expectation can match with what was executed. But beyond that, I don't know if we need to surface the values as well as part of that data
I mean,
dictionary because I think uh, I think we would more provide a meaningful message.
mhm.
I think if I throw an exception of something saying we've got a character length of 255, then I would say in my message that's user friendly, the text exceeded 255 characters, rather than just putting the value in there.
We would need somehow, this is actually a great point. We would need somehow, well, the logging at least should log and say this
Yeah,
is why this value is valid. Because the very first question that an engineer is going to ask when they're debugging a system is why? Why did
yeah,
it throw that validation? What was the original value that it determined,
yeah,
right? Because that original value could be a valid scenario.
yeah. So we've got that as part of the rule, and I think because
But how will you communicate it? Like on the
uh,
API, I can understand it on the API. On the API, you're sending a request, you're getting a validation error, you still have the request body, right? But
yeah.
what about
So
like
so
mhm,
I've only thought in terms of internal. So internal to the API, you can do your internal logging. You'll see all that detail. Because let me quickly show you what I've done on the test as well. Um, so um, um, okay, so this is our validation test. So
mhm,
this is similar to the one that we would have added uh, at, uh, all the permutations for invalid at the top. I didn't do it
mhm,
this time. I created because last week you showed that example where you wrap the logic around the service where you said, what if this property is the same as that? So in this case, I created invalid string,
uh,
and I basically use that function to get back to that. So
oh, so
um,
it randomizes the
yeah, so
scenarios.
yeah,
Mhm.
and I can do that now because my test that I've got for invalid string already test that, so I don't have to.
But just be aware, this scales beyond the string type. Like think about it. Like if you have invalid dates, right? Like for instance, in a logical validation, when you go and say, the date of birth is not supposed to be before 1985, right? So you have a huge range of possible invalid dates that
Yes,
could
but
go in. Mhm,
yeah,
mhm.
but I see that kind of stuff. So what I try to do here is, because we don't test um, our validation success, the method that determines the success or the fail. I see that kind of stuff that you're talking about as its own test. So I've got a, a f- a true test, and I've got a failing test, where the failing test is uh, all the successes, and that's that. So I don't have to, for this rule, do that again. and similar to the valid URL, I've got something that's a valid URL, and I've got something that's an invalid URL. So when it comes to the validation test itself, I can get a random in here because I thoroughly tested the rule on the other one. So I simplified that, and then the next thing that I did is, because we took the validation broker external, I need to set up all the rules that I can pass to the broker. So I created a method to create all the validation criteria. So we've got each one of these is a rule, and the rule is a condition is Boolean. So I just wanted a true false option on that, so that I can quickly generate that, because otherwise I would need to replicate that over every test. Whereas at the moment, if I do that, I know that's the properties I want to touch. On the next test, I might only need one.
Right.
So I don't have to do all of that. So that sets up my conditions, and then also in my conditions, I've set up values. So on the conditions, you can see I don't actually use the validation rule. I'm just setting the expectation based on what I pass in. And my expectation is that I use source property for that one, name for that one. And then in my test, then on the validation broker, we throw the error, invalid source exception. And then when we test it, we've got verify that validation broker was called with that. And I have to do same as, because it's a value comparison, not a reference comparison. And that gives me my things. And if I can quickly show you on that, so say I disable those ones. I can immediately see that that has failed, and it tells me for that parameter URL with a message of URL is invalid, I expect a condition false but found true. So
I don't know if this expected condition false but found true. Why would that be useful? We already know that it's invalid, right? You know what I mean?
So this is I don't have to output that. That is just for debugging purposes.
Just for debugging.
So if I go back to this method, say for instance I add this condition as true, and I just do same as, and I don't output that to the screen. Say let me just quickly do that. If I take that out, which is like we normally do our same as, we just expect a Boolean outcome. You're going to see the mock is invalid.
Right.
But mock itself is not going to tell you what the fault was.
That's true. That's true. It'll say I expected this to be called once, but yeah.
So that's the same kind of message that you would normally get if you do that. So all I did was I wanted to get that detail to get me faster to what the error was. So I used same as rule to use test output helper. That's part of XUnit. And then I just wrote the differences to the test window. So that is super useful for me. If you don't want that, you don't have to use it. But I found it's super helpful for me to put that out. It's a similar thing that we've done with exceptions when we compare the dictionaries.
Yeah.
If we use same exception as, you get all that nice detail that we saw last time when we demoed it. But if you don't inject this test output helper, you wouldn't know if there's an issue on the verify. it will just tell you that the invocation never happened for what was expected. So which is slightly different. But so on that test, I could spot that now. Let me just undo all my changes, and then I can show the other one as well. So in that criteria, because we've and this is to cater for that issue that Adrian highlighted, that you pointed out.
Yep.
We've got an expectation that those values be called. I've only surfaced it in that. So if I go to my implementation for there's the if I take those two out, I run my test again, it'll say that the values is not matched. So it doesn't quite say so I can see that so I can see the values created by is not found.
There's some stuff going on there, but yeah, I see the
yeah. So I still don't I still can't test directly that where's the rule itself again? I still can't test directly that name of is related to that one, but what I can do with this is I can make sure that my expectation on the unit test match my expectation when it comes to the execution of the rules. So if you did use another value, it'll tell you that the values is different because values is no longer matching.
right. So three things I got out of this, right? There might be potentially a good way for us, and I think you're knocking on that door specifically, that we can externalize the validation engine. I'm with you there. We could do that, definitely. I still think even that little business rules engine that we build, even though we try to make it as elegant as possibly be, sometimes you're just kind of, what did we do again? Because there's like a dynamic array of rules that you have to pass in and then check with these rules, and then there's still some holes in it. There's still some problems in it. So I agree with you there 100%, which is, it's funny because, I think probably 5, maybe 4 years ago, we used to break the circuit with every error on every property. The problem with that is your customer would have to send 50 different API requests to fix every single error
Yeah,
individually. We actually used to do that. It used to look pretty, but it didn't exactly, like, it's crazy how we evolved from this to that. So I'm with you on that. I'm not sure about having hybrid set of rules in here. Like having validation rules is invalid for this, but then I have my own kind of localized rules. It kind of puts it's the same argument that I make about putting some of your rules on the model and saying this is required so the controller, kind of rejects it off the bat, versus having internal rules, for specific things in the service itself.
yeah,
I'm not sure about that one, because
yeah.
if you do that, now your rules are all over the place. Like there's no one place where you can go and see, what your rules are. Like you're gonna have to go and say, oh, what did this library do exactly?
Yeah. So I still think you've got a true collection of all your rules, and I'm only thinking of um, all the operational type of things that you might do, similar to all the OData commands, greater than, greater, equal, those kinds of rules. So if it's more than that,
Well, let me ask you this: what if I want to internationalize the messages that come out of these rules? How much change that would make?
then you can bring that into your model. I don't think we want to. We can always make the model. If you want to inject a message, then you have to do your local test for that.
See, that's what I'm saying. Like, if
So
this it
so
go,
so,
mhm, mhm,
so
mhm.
if you want to use something out of the box like string is null or empty, that works. It gives you the Boolean outcome that you would expect.
Mhm.
Um, if you want to do something more like internationalization, then I would see it'll be probably local rules.
You're gonna have to create local rules.
Yeah, but um,
Mm,
I was more thinking if because local testing is already 2 tests per rule that you add
right,
because you test the true outcome and the false outcome for that rule.
right.
If you're not using more than those rules on any of your services, then you save a hell of a lot of um, duplication on your test over n amount of services, whether it's foundation, processing, uh, orchestration, that you don't have to test again. Um,
It'll definitely save time, but it's just whether.
Even if you say then, uh, because I can externalize my rules,
Mhm.
um, there's no reason why we can't surface any of these rules through a broker either as well. Um, so you could expose that isn't valid, or any of the things that you want to use from the external library through your broker. Um, that's another way. But I think for me that the big thing is if I suddenly have to say, okay, we've had a standard rule change and we now have to do um, 2 tests more for every service, and the test doesn't differ between one service and another. So that's a lot of repetition that I can save if and bear in mind that that would be framework logic. It will be accepted and trusted. We could probably test the rules by injecting the message and testing the expectation by that as well if you want to do internationalization. But yeah, I've not specifically looked at that.
But,
I think there is ways to do it.
but by the way, it's not like, you know what I'm asking? Like, it's not necessarily internationalization specifically. It's about the scalability and expansion, and
Mm,
whether your rules will, like, if I rely on these rules, right? Every time I need to expand, you still have this mixed bag of rules that are local and external, and why it's
yeah.
not working.
So so
Mhm.
so at the moment, yes, you're going to be restricted to condition, message, and values because that's what your validation engine use. So
Oh yeah, that's right. You can't control the message as well in the rule. But you can add another parameter that says when this errors out, add this message, and that's just two birds with one stone because you fix the internationalization problem.
yeah,
But also at the same time, you get to say which message you really want to communicate, right?
yeah,
That could solve that. But then now your rules are getting bigger and bigger, like more and more parameters, you know. But by the way, just for everyone watching, if your method, this is not a written rule yet in the standard, but if your method takes more than 3 parameters, you should probably model. You should probably put them in a model. If it takes more than 3 parameters, then we have a problem.
mm.
But yeah, I've seen methods.
Yeah. Now we get past that because we use the dynamic for rule at the moment. So we've only got a rule and parameter.
Right.
Uh, but yeah, I think it was a nice play for me. I think
No, no, no. It's
it
more.
made
It's
me
more
think
than
in
a.
a lot of ways.
It's more than a play. I think, like from a standard community perspective, I think that we have to evolve, Krista. We have to get out of like we've been knocking the door on things like the standard 3.0 for years, right?
Mm,
Are we ready to externalize? Are we ready to build our standard in bunch of floating objects that send messages to each other? By the way, when that happens, you don't have to worry about like almost 60% of what we do today. Because believe it or not, like even with the externalization of, not the externalization, even with the asynchronization abstraction that we just announced a few days ago,
mm,
even with that, it's still not truly agnostic
mm,
because you still have to know a name of a method, right? Like your interface has to have a name for a method. With the standard 3.0, you don't even have to know what the method name is that's handling your request. You're just sending a message. That's all you
yeah.
know. So, which is not a novel idea. It's what Alan Kay, the father of object-oriented programming, presented. He said object-oriented programming is a bunch of objects sending messages to each other. If you think about it in our bodies, blood cells, that's how they talk to each other. They're all over the place, right? And they're just talking to each other, right? You know, it's not as remote message as you see in a single system, but as they get closer to each other, they start kind of communicating. Um, um, so anyway, what I was trying to say is I think there's a huge value in the externalization of business rules engine. That's for sure.
Mm,
I am still not sure about having rules localized and externalized because that's literally, by the way, just so you know, I go up in the opposite direction of a mixed bag of things in general, not just a particular thing, like not just the rules or whatnot, because some people a while ago they said to me, why don't you let the structural validation sit on the model and the logical validation sit on the service? That's a huge argument,
mm,
right? That's a very strong argument. At glance, it sounds amazing, right? Until you get to the part where some services will allow some properties to have different types of data that may be considered a violation in other services. And that's where their whole argument just fell apart, right? Because you're
mm,
assuming that a string is allowed to be null or empty or white space across all your services. When you build enterprise systems, I'm pretty sure you know this, and a lot of people know this,
mm,
some rules will change. It's like when you travel to different countries. Services are like different foundation services, but of course, they are like different countries. Every country has its own rules, right? So that didn't work out. I also want to acknowledge something in here. If we don't come up, like we still like we are in a weak position where we don't have a solution for all these security and issue holes, the holes that we kind of talked about, the four holes that we talked about throughout this stream so far, right? Streams like these will bring these kind of ideas out of me. Like will basically have me say, okay, here's another challenge, right? I mean, the guy didn't want to take the $100, you know, Adrian, whatever you are, you know, we appreciate you, but you know, we'll give it to some charity in your name, and that's it. But that's how we still don't have a solution so far. By far, what you just presented is a solution, and we don't have an alternative. So if that
mm.
stays the same for a while, then we're going to have to adapt this because otherwise our logic, our unit test is not truly bulletproof, right? The only other alternative, which is some people proposed to me, said, so what? Let's just write one per property. I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. Because if you end up with 175 properties on a model, which I've
Yeah, it will be
seen,
brutal.
that will be a destruction to the engineer themselves. Then we're not really working towards the engineer's betterment.
Mm.
Um, okay, you know, I'd like to take the week to rewatch what you just did and just think about, you know, what are we gonna do about it? Please put this in a branch in the standard organization, you know, and you know, I think you put it in a branch already, the POC validation, that's where it's at.
Yeah, it's just a PR. I'll move it to its own branch.
Yeah, let's put it in its own branch and then let's see if we can let's
Yeah,
see if we
and
can keep
anyone
contact.
can. Yeah, anyone can. If I put it in own branch, anyone can play with it and make their own
Yes.
changes to it to see if we can get different versions to it.
Yep, and I know there is a way, there's a lot of smart people that watch our stream. right? You see it. You see it in the comments. People actually will sit down and try to tackle some issues that we bring up. Um, I think that I just want people to kind of look at the problem that Krista just presented and try to tell us, what do they think? Because your input is important. Remember, the standard is not just a one-person thing. It's not a one-directional thing. We try to protect some principles as much as possible, but some ideas are just too hard to, and just like the one that Krista just presented, it's just a hard idea to dodge, to push away. It's very hard. Um, okay, cool. Anything else you want to add on that matter?
No, I think I've shared everything.
This tremendous work, Krista. I appreciate you for this. It's really good. And it seems like the candidate, like so far, it's the only candidate we have to solve some of these problems that we have in the system. All right. So we turned this into a standard discussion session instead of actually get file session. So you and I probably should meet up sometime, maybe tomorrow or Monday or whatever you're available at the closest to close the foundation service because we're almost at time.
Yeah. Um, Tomorrow same time probably.
Yeah, let's connect tomorrow at the same time then because we have to close get file. I'll change the I'll change the name of this video and the title to standard discussions because that's the thing. It's like a timeline. You branch off of the timeline and you go into we still have the outstanding instructions, the method weight kind of challenge. We still have a lot of things, bro. We still have quite a bit of things to figure
Yeah.
out. And someone just presented me with another crazy idea. I can't talk about it yet. I have to I have to POC it, put something out there. It's mostly on the Blazor side of things, like the UI side of things. Like one hell of a crazy idea, and we really need to solve this in order for us to be able to kind of survive as an engineering community. Um, Also for everyone just to understand, one of the new goals that I'm setting up for this community is for us to be able to uh, like our stamp, standard compliant software, that stamp going on software at some point in time, maybe in my lifetime, maybe not, we don't know, but that stamp going on software should ensure any company that's using that software that this is solid software they can use because software now gets into people's lives. Like when you get admitted, I hope you never do, but when you get admitted into an emergency room, everything around you is running on software. From the moment they get your details, your insurance or whatever, however you guys, however it's happening in England, right? To the moment they start kind of measuring your blood pressure, to the moment they start kind of, writing analysis and running analysis, this is all computerized. So imagine if the code that's kind of determining whether you have problems in your blood or not is faulty. What's going to happen?
Mm,
The doctors are going to make wrong decisions. They're going to prescribe the wrong medicine, and eventually it's going to hurt the patient. It happens more than you can imagine, more often than you can imagine, but you can't detect it. You know what the doctors would say that's impossible. The machine said, and there's no way
mm,
for the doctor to debug the machine because they're doctors. So
yeah.
eventually, as a community, right, my hope is throughout the standard foundation or the standard organization is that we become the de facto for software that you can trust with your life. Maybe
Mm,
that's going to be the motto, software you can trust with your life, right? Maybe that's the motto of it. Because I can guarantee you, you know what, Crystal, you know this for a fact, like some of the software that runs in hospitals and whatever things that affects people's lives, I can tell you right now, there's absolutely no unit test written for that. Integration tests, you just hope it works. You know how some people actually develop good software through trial and error, but what if the trial is a human being's life? That's a problem.
Yeah.
So that's why we care. That's why we continue to evolve. It's also a great mental exercise, which is what mad scientists like Christo kind of thrive on. Just kind of,
Mm,
let's just see if we can make this work. I just want to bring the importance of this to people because, a while ago, someone said to me, why do you bother? You already build cleaner software than the next 90%, 95% of people. Why do you continue to push this? I was like, here's why, right? That's the idea. The idea is that if the software that we're writing is not solid, it can hurt someone's life
mm.
if used. Christo, do you know where every library we developed is being used today? Can you actually put your finger on where RESTful Sense is being used today? No idea.
No.
No idea, right? So if you are at the DMV here in America is like where you go get your driver's license and all that, right? And they're using RESTful Sense. Let's just say, for all intents and purposes, say they're using RESTful Sense, right? And a request came through and we didn't parse the request properly and it errored out. That person is going to be sitting there all day waiting.
Mm.
Software is dangerous. It can impact people's lives, and we have to kind of build it with the idea that every single consumer of these libraries that we build is going to build something that could actually cause someone harm if not built properly and used properly. This also bring
Yep.
another conversation, which is that I'm working with Greg on this. I'm just starting to kind of, chat with him very slightly about this, is to have like a standard license agreement. And I think I talked to you, Christo, about
Mm.
this. You can't use this for hatred. You can't use this for harm. You can't use this to, for something that is, it's all free, it's yours, but you can't go use it to harm someone or hurt someone in any way, shape, or capacity, mentally, physically, or spiritually, in any way.
Yeah.
All right, let's sync up tomorrow and see if we can get the get file core service done.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you everyone for watching. We'll talk later. Take care.
Bye bye.